Hello, everyone. My name is Arthur Lindo. I'm a solutions architect with IDERA software, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about how our tool can help you with governing data. Now, when you're first starting to select a component to help you govern your data, it's a good idea to have these particular aspects addressed in that particular software. So some of the key components, and I'll read this to you, is to manage business glossaries and terms and show how those are translated and used in the enterprise. Also, you'd like to be able to manage your business rules and validate those, help your data meet the organizational standards for data quality. You'd also like to be able to have some sort of component that allows you for security and auditing, so you can document the role-based access to data. You'd also need, of course, your metadata management and your visualizations, and then, of course, your visualization and your reporting for your modeling and how all of that stuff ties together. And then, of course, application integration. Now, this application integration can speak to integration within the entire application itself or with other third-party applications. Now, how we manage this in TeamServer is through three different components, and each of these components are included in a specific package for our software. So we have three different editions. We have the Data Architect, then we have the Professional Edition, and we have Enterprise Team Edition, and then we have TeamServer Core, which is an add-on to Enterprise Team Edition. So what you're seeing here is the Data Architect on the left-hand side, and these objects and processes are influenced by the data modelers and data architects. So data architect allows you to do your modeling, your metadata capture, your rules, and various other documentations as far as like data lineage and things like that. Now, TeamServer, the repository, is essentially a source control system, but because it's also a database that holds all of your modeling information, it's a single source of truth for your entire modeling application or enterprise. Now, when you combine that database with a web component, which is TeamServer Core on the right, this allows the business user to not just create their glossaries and terms, but they can also view, visualize, and navigate through all of your different models and whatnot if you choose to publish those. And I'll show you how this is going to go down in just a little bit. But the web component allows them to not only create business side logic and constructs and concepts, but they can also apply those constructs and concepts to the actual model objects themselves. This gives the models that much more power and understanding and usability through the entire enterprise. Okay, and all of these people can use those on the right-hand side, of course, software engineers, DBAs, business analysts, and of course the ETL or data movement engineers all the way down. Now, what this graphic doesn't show is that through TeamServer Core, the collaboration bit that they have there, you can actually communicate virtually through this TeamServer Core or this web component to your data modelers and data architects. So if a business user is seeing a concept or a construct in the data model that doesn't really quite jive with, say, particular business rules, they can communicate that through this web interface to the data modelers and data architects, and then hopefully enact change, get the sign off, enact that change on the model, and then push that change into the web component. Now, how this works is we have three different things. Now, of course, the back end, the repository, doesn't really have anything for you to see. It's just a database, right? So what we're going to be showing you is how Data Architect, and I have these two things open at the same time for a reason. So we have two components, main components that are GUI driven. So the Data Architect on the right-hand side, and then you have TeamServer on the left-hand side. And in between these is a database in the back end, which we call the repository. In Data Architect, I'm logged into the repository. Click repository, simply log in, and you can log into your repository. Now, the repository can be housed on a SQL server or an Oracle server instance in the cloud or on-prem, wherever you wish to put it, as long as the client, the user on their machine can actually connect to it. Okay, so when I log in, like I was saying, that the repository is basically a source control system. So a person can actually check things out, they can branch and merge, they can control the versions, and so forth and so on. Now, the neat thing about this too is that a data modeler can actually influence or enhance the capabilities in TeamServer, and I'll show you why in just a little bit. Now, getting back to the managing business glossaries and terms. So we started with a basic construct of some of the application benefits that you would look for in a data governance platform. The main one is the managing business glossaries and terms, and that's done through TeamServer. Now in TeamServer, if I click on the home, this is the home screen for TeamServer. This is the web component that sits on top of the repository and exposes those objects that you wish to publish to this mechanism. Now, a business user can come in here and create their own specific glossaries and then have terms underneath those glossaries. Each of these glossaries, you can turn permissions on or off for various groups or users. You can also promote people to stewardship and allow them the editing capabilities of particular aspects as well. Inside here, for this particular glossary, I've created one called AccountTraining. Now, this is the component that makes up the AccountTraining. A person can come in here, they can edit this. I can because I'm logged in as admin. And of course, all of these objects also have a stream, description, and discussions. Now, when I was talking about the communication between the end users and the data architects virtually through this web mechanism, you would do that specifically through discussions. So a person could create a discussion around this particular glossary, and after submitting that, anybody who is following this object, they would see that there's a discussion put on, there's a discussion started. So here's a typical discussion and who is eligible for this, and maybe include that into the definition and so forth. Now, in the stream of this particular object, you can also see all the different changes that have occurred, who made the change, what the change was, and when the change was made. And upon following this, again, because I'm admin, if you're following an object in your home screen on your own personal stream, you can see the changes that have occurred to these objects. So now, if a data architect, when the data architect is following the same objects as a business development person or someone on the business side, they can communicate through this mechanism for specific changes of these objects. Now, obviously, you're not going to communicate with a data modeler for a change in a glossary because that's on the business side. But what you would communicate with them are the objects that are inside the model. And each glossary can have their own specific terms. Now, in these terms, you can link those to specific objects in their ER models. I've got a number of models here, and I can see, I'm just viewing these objects, but I can limit the objects that I actually want to connect this to, say, for instance, agency, and I see that there's an agency name. This is where it's located in the DM1 file. It's in this particular name DM1 file. It's in this model inside that file. It's in this table inside that model, and then it's this column here. So if I want to relate those things, I just click relate, and then I'm going to click column here, and then I can go here to agency, and I'm going to say type in agency, and now I can link the agency name to this agency. And maybe I don't want to do it by column. Maybe I'd like to do it by entity. And I can link the entire entity of, say, a logical model directly to this term. So this gives this term enhanced context of where agency, not only is it defined in business terms, but where it's located in the overall infrastructure. And I can link this as well. Now, if I want, I can also go the opposite direction. So if I'm looking to populate the agency, and again, let me go back. with the stream. So in agency, we can look at the stream. I've related this agency to this glossary, and I've also created this agency, and I can see the changes that have happened to this. And I can also see over here at the on the side here what this is actually related to. So it's kind of a shortcut or um, a home page for this particular object. Now, like I said, if I wanted to and I knew what I was doing as a business user, I could go into the ER tools and I could search through the projects and into this one particular project and go into one particular DM1 file. This is a physical model, and I can see the thumbnail of it just by scrolling over it. And maybe I want to go into it a little bit further, so I click the eyeball. And we're talking about agency, so let's go over here to this particular table. And of course, I can also slide things around. I can move things around a little bit. This doesn't persist in any way. It's just a way that I can kind of change things around to make it a little bit more understandable to me. And a business user can't make changes directly to the models. The models themselves can only be changed through Data Architect. And then when those models are checked in, if you have a model that's already published to TeamServer, then it would, when you check it out, when the modeler checks it out, it makes changes and checks it back in, it'll automatically be published again to TeamServer, unless of course you specify otherwise. Now a person can come in here and they can actually relate this to specific terms. So for instance, if I see the agency table, I can relate this to a specific term if I want. And I can go here to relate and choose any of these terms that are in my TeamServer, and I can choose to relate them to any term that I wish. So you can go back and forth depending on how you want to relate these two things, these ER objects to terms or from terms to ER objects. Now going back here, oftentimes you want to do, now that's how glossaries and terms are managed through our tool. Now the next bit is business rule validation. So you can help the data meet the organizational standards for data quality. Now, what you would do for this, for specific business rules, and you can have these business rules defined in certain places. What I like to do for particular business rules is I like to come into a model, and inside your model, you have a data dictionary. Now, what I've done, when you check in a model into the repository, you have a choice to promote that data dictionary to an enterprise level data dictionary. When you promote it to an enterprise level data dictionary, it affords you a certain robustness, that it enhances that data dictionary, where not only can every modeler then apply that data dictionary to their models and use everything that you've created inside that data dictionary, but you can also create specific attachments. And in creating those attachments, you can use those in TeamServer to enhance the attributes for glossaries, terms, data objects, people, and so forth and so on. And I'll show you that in just a second. So what I would do is I created a business data rule here. And all I did is simply right click and say new attachment. Here I'm going to edit this attachment, and I called it business data rule. First, I'm going to check this out. Let's do that. I should have had this checked out at the beginning. Sorry about that, y'all. So I created a business data rule here. It's just a business data rule, and this is a business rule that the data must be compliant. The value is a text, and I'm just going to leave that blank for now and say OK. So here, now that I have this attachment, and I check this in, and I publish it to TeamServer, I can then go to, and I can see that in my ER tools here. If I go into my enterprise data dictionary, I can see that I have this particular attachment, business data rule. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this business data rule attachment to specific terms. And I'm also going to do it to data sources. Now I can specify specific data rules that things may happen. Like for instance, in this particular model, let's build the image. In this particular model, maybe I have a data rule that every employee has to have the basic indoctrination course. for instance. Maybe that's a business rule. Now, where would I put that business rule? Would I put that on employee? Would I put that on training course? Or would I put that on training history? Or would I just put it in the idea or the term for training? Now, the choice is up to you, right? You can do whatever you wish to it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to terms. But before I do that, I'm going to go over to admin. I'm going to do my managed attributes here. And here I can see I'm in the glossaries, tabs, people, data source. I can apply this to any of these objects. Now, does it make sense to have a business data rule to a glossary? Not in my case. So I'm going to apply it to a term, which I've already done here. I can also do that to specific data sources. And maybe that's a good idea, right? Maybe you want to control who gets access to a specific data source, or under what rules does this data source apply. You can also apply these attributes to tables, columns, the logical entities, logical attributes. Now this is business entity and business attribute, but that's essentially physical in the physical model. So it's a physical table and a physical column and so forth. So I've applied this to the terms. So if I go back to a specific term, where am I here? I'm just gonna cover the tabs that I have open here and refresh my brain. So if I go back into glossaries and I go into accounting and account training, and I take a look at the terms, now maybe it makes sense, like I said, to do this in course. So in course, as you can see, there's a business data rule attribute now. So if I click edit, I can say that there's a business data rule that every employee must have the basic indoctrination course before first paycheck, maybe. And I can't spell indoctrination, which is odd because I was in the military. Can't spell course either. Oh my goodness. I guess that second cup of coffee just got me all kind of jittery. So the business data rule, every employee must have the basic indoctrination course before their first paycheck is issued. I don't know what the legality is for that, but in this particular instance, that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to click save here. And now the user can see that this term actually has a business data rule associated with it. So that business data rule, though it's only applied to the term, that business data rule could also be inferred to the related ER objects inside here as well. All the objects that are related to this course would then also have this applied to it as well. Oh, sorry, I'm going to go to view. So these are all the objects that are actually related to course. You have course ID and columns and so forth. Now, going into data sources, because there is a thing that you really want to keep track of, and that's your security and auditing and the role-based access to data. Now, the data access can be controlled or at least documented through this data sources tab. Now this data source, I'm going to actually add another data source. So I'm going to go here to the right here and say new data source. I'm going to give this a name and I'm going to say HR data. And all of this stuff is going to be dummy information. So you can put in the definition to this of who has access maybe, or why this is important, or maybe even the compliances that this needs to follow if that's what you want to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put in, I believe the host name has to be put in here, the port, remote DB name, HRDB, schema ID, DBO, and I think that's it. So I'm going to save this. All right. And notice that there's also a business data rule associated with it. Just like all the others, has a definition, product level, and business data rule and additional notes. So if I click here to edit, I can then give this even further definition. Not just all of that I just put in was just the connection strings and how it connects to that database, and under, you know, what server it's located, and, you know, the user password and name and stuff. This is actually additional metadata that you can give to this particular data connection, and you can give certain people access to this. Okay, so here I can go in here and, oh my goodness, what is it down at the bottom? So here's my additional attribute that I created from that attachment. So I can put in a business data rule here where that limits the power of certain people being able to use this data connection. Now, these data connections can also be used in Data Architect to understand where this model and tied to a specific model. So that way people can see, okay, this model is actually coming from this particular data source, and this is the information that this data source, this is the schema of this particular data source. So it gives it much more definition. So you have a definition of actually what is over there on that server as far as the database configuration, who has access to that, and what that looks like, and added additional information to that connection as well. And of course, this would also cover all of the different permissions. You can add that to the descriptions of who has permissions, who are the users, what permission level they may have, and all of that information. Now, as far as metadata management and visualization, through TeamServer, you have the ability to, it's self-serve. You check in your models into the repository, and then the admin can then either secondhand or retroactively publish these objects, or you can publish them if you're given permission. You can publish directly from Data Architect to TeamServer, and this gives the business user the ability to self-serve this information. They can go in here into specific projects. You can limit it by project and allow people to see things. If they would much rather see this in more of a linear fashion, then they can display all of the objects and then filter them by the object type over here on the left, or they can also filter it by name. They can see it alphabetically or numerically, and it defaults to alphabetical, of course, but this gives them another way to also navigate through all of the objects inside your model files. Now, without TeamServer, what you would do in Data Architect to allow the business users to visualize this information, you would go up here to Tools and generate these reports. Now, I prefer the HTML report. The RTF report is very tabular, very linear, and it's like an old school DBA's data dictionary. So it gives a list of all the tables, all the columns inside those tables, how the tables relate to other columns, the relationships, the indexes, all that stuff. But it's all essentially just in a document. What I like is the HTML because it makes it a little bit easier to navigate. And it's very similar to TeamServer's offering. And when I click next, I can choose what components of this diagram I actually want to show in my model and allow drill down capabilities. I'm going to choose everything, and I don't have any data lineage as of yet. And in the data dictionary, I'm going to choose to show all the data dictionary and all these different properties for the data dictionary. And over here are the image types that I want to choose to show for the models, essentially the ERDs. And I could choose to show all of the models or just some of the models if I wish. So if this is a very large model, has a number of different, physical models in it, maybe I just want to show the logical model to a particular customer or consumer, and I can limit it that way. Now, clicking next, I can also put in all of my author information and then click finish. Now, when I click finish, this is going to open up in a web browser here. And a person can then open this up, just like with TeamServer. They can browse through the tree view here. They can take a look at the main menu. They can see the image. Now, they can't move any of this information around to make it more visually appealing, but they can double click on this or actually single click and drill through all of these objects. They can see the DDL code because it's the physical model. In the logical model, you wouldn't have that, but this is the physical model, and they can also drill into specific columns. And if you have that information, they would also be able to see the data movement rules that you may have, any bound attachments, and also where this is being used as well. So notice that this particular column is being used in these 3 different models files, or models inside this one model file. It's being used in HRDB prod, HRDB dev, and the logical model as well. Now, if you have any column column level data lineage, where you can specify your source, secondary direct targets, direct source, secondary source, direct targets, and secondary targets. You can do that in Data Architect to show this column level data lineage, so you can see exactly where this one particular source came from. And again, you can use those data connections to document exactly where that data is coming from, what its ultimate source is. And this is very handy when you have a data warehouse with multiple sources. You can specify the sources in this model file as well as your data warehouse, and then you can specify where that data warehouse is collecting its information, and if there are any aggregates or any other logic before it gets into the ultimately comes into the data warehouse. And of course, a person can see that in the data lineage. I don't have any in this one, but they can also go through the data dictionary if you want, so they can see these different attachments with the definition of these attachments, and of course, domains. And domain is a concept that we have that's essentially a shareable attribute. In making these domains, you can then specify the hard constructs of specific columns. For instance, you can have your atomic modeling essentially, or you can create these shared attributes, have them defined once in one location, and then use those attribute definitions in other columns. So say, for instance, you might have a title, like I have here, but there may be different types of titles, right? There might be Mr., Mrs., Miss, Mr., or there might be Doctor or MD, or you might have various values, but they're all going to be defined the same way, whether that's a book title or a person's title. So you can have that same definition, but in a different table, it would say book title, and in another table, it would say person's title as far as the column name, but they're still defined the exact same way. And because of that definition, that shared definition that we have, if you make a change to that domain, it'll also make that change throughout the entire model, which is very handy as far as data modeling is concerned. So you can create these domains. All of your other modelers can then use those same domains, just changing the name, and that creates a standard of how specific things should be defined as in varchar 100 or a character 10 or something. Now, the last bit is the application integration. Now, we have the ability to export various components and various collections of this tool out to different tools. So for instance, with Calibra, we have the ability to create APIs out of TeamServer. And you can also, because you have a database, which is the repository, you can also query that database directly if you so choose, and dispense that over to other visualizations like Tableau or ClickView, or even create your own reports with SQL reporting services and export those to your own specific web component. Now that's the extract. There's also a way to extract through our macros, and our macros out of the box with Data Architect, we have loads of different macros. Now, these are modeling productivity macros, which allow you to do a lot of conditional formatting and things like that. What we have also are the metadata management macros, and these come out of the box, allow you to export specific objects. You can export various metadata, you can import various metadata and columns and domains and so forth. And when you export and import those, these are all written in WinWrap Basic. Now, if you're going to choose to want to say import index names from Excel, it's a good idea to create an index name and export that first to see what that concept or that construct looks like. Now, each of these, like I said, were written in WinWrap Basic. So if you know Visual Basic, you know this. And that has a nice little editor here as well. You have an immediate window. You also have your run window, so you can put in a watch list if you wish. And you can make any kind of macro happen however you want. And it's great for this. What's also great about this is it allows you for full automation. So you can call these macros directly from, say, the command line. So you'd say erstudio.exe and then give it the macro name and whatever parameters you need to push to it, and it'll run that for you, which is pretty great when you are doing some batch things or you're doing multiple doing the same process over and over and over again. Now, as far as ingestion, so that's exporting information and getting this, because you've created all of these models, you've done a lot of documentation, you've created all this stuff, and now you want to share it, right? So that's the way that you would go about sharing this information out. So you can create reports through tools report generation, or you can export various objects from our various collections directly from here, or do that from the database, or you can do it through an API call. And I'm going to include our doc wiki, and I'm going to put that into the chat because I find that a number of people don't actually have the doc wiki here. So to everyone, that is our doc wiki. It is full of information on how to do certain things. If you're hung up on naming standards template, just type in naming standards. If you're hung up with automation and APIs, you can type that in as well, and you can search how an API works and how you would instantiate that and how you would register it with your server and so forth and so on. Okay. Now, as far as interoperability with external information, say you want to bring in information from an external source into Data Architect, with Enterprise Team Edition, we have these external metadata bridges. And if I choose to import from external metadata, you'll see a very big list. So this is the list of import bridges that we have. So metadata export, this is the ability for you to export to these different platforms. And metadata import bridges are where you can import from. And the data lineage import bridges are data lineage bridges, analysis services, integration services, object intelligence, informatica, power center, ETL stuff, files, things that are actually moving your information. And the export bridges are the ability for you to export your modeling information to these platforms. Now, going back over to Data Architect, again, all I did was import and choose, and then open up the external metadata and ETL mappings, and I can ingest from all of these different file sources. Now I'm just going to scroll down through. But you can look at that as well, and I will also include this in the chat for y'all. So that's the list of bridges that we have for ingestion and exporting as well. Now, if you want, you can also export file, export to XML. So you can actually export this information to XML or a document type definition, however you want. And you can also when you export, you can also configure that as well. So here's the metadata bridges. I chose to export diagram metadata, and these are the different platforms that you can export directly to as well. So if you want to export this to a Tableau file, you can do that as however you wish. Most of these support XML, and that's what happens is that this tool converts all of that information to XML and then dumps it out to a XML mechanism that these external objects can use. So we've spoken a little bit about how to manage your business glossaries and terms in TeamServer, your business rule validation, and how you can create those business rules in TeamServer and also translate those business rules to objects inside your models. And also, we also talked about security and auditing and how you can document the role-based access to your data through your data objects and data connections. We also spoke a little bit about the metadata management and visualization, and that's through creating the reports, and actually that's through Data Architect and TeamServer. The metadata management is Data Architect as well as TeamServer, and the visualization, of course, is done through TeamServer. Next bit is the visualization and reporting, and through Data Architect, if you do not have TeamServer Core, you can report all that information out manually and then share that to either a SharePoint or a Confluence website or even Git if you wish. And then of course the application integration is through the metadata bridges for your exporting and your ingestion. You can also use the macros for exporting that information. And of course with TeamServer, you can also include APIs and create your own APIs to export that information or even change information if you wish. Now, I'm finished with my spiel, so if y'all have any questions, I'm happy to take them now. Now, the one question we have is, does this tool provide interoperability with other tools, i.e. to pull in metadata or terms, objects, etc.? And yes, we do, and I went through the list of bridges, the metadata bridges, and those are also included in the chat. So if you want to, please don't hesitate to copy those links that I put into the chat. Question, how are users notified of discussions? It's a great question. I think I lightly touched on that. So in TeamServer, a user, you can set it up in such a way that a person can go into notifications, and these are the 4 different rules of when a person can choose to be notified. So when someone posts on my stream, or someone comments on one of my posts, or I posted on, someone follows my stream, or a system posts a data source alert notification to my stream. Actually, there's another one here. I need to update my version. So in the new version, you also have the ability to choose to be email alerted when someone changes something that you're following. So you have that as well. Can you reverse engineer artifacts from different vendor applications with the data bridge? Yes, you can. In fact, with that list of data bridges, that for the import, if you look in the import slot, let me take a look here. If you look at the metadata import bridges, these are all the different platforms and applications that we can ingest information from. And of course, we only work with schema. So if you, provided that these objects actually have a schema to reverse engineer, we can visualize those objects that it's using. So if it's an ETL development, if it's an ETL file, it'll bring in the objects that are of the source, the transformation in between, and the destination as well, specifically for Informatica and information services. From the IDERA side, what does it take to deploy a tool like this for an enterprise? So that is a great question. So when you're asking, are you talking about everything that I've shown, TeamServer, the repository, and Data Architect? I'm going to assume so. So to that end, what you're going to need is you're going to need a database. You're going to need a server. And that server has to be either a SQL or Oracle-based server instance. And like I said, it can be either on the cloud or on-prem, just as long as it's within your environment or enterprise. And then what you're also going to need is, so that server can house your database, and it can also have your TeamServer, your web component. Now you can have those 2 pieces on 2 separate servers if you want, or you can have them on the same. Most people do the same, so that way it just kind of limits the IO and so forth. And then you would just have Data Architect on each of the client computers, the users, the modelers that are actually going to be using that tool and creating those models. They would have their own Data Architect instance. That's basically it. As long as you can get that server space, it's really a quite simple install. The next question is, when reverse engineering a database that has many tables, I started with 12 tables but need to add 3 more afterward. How do I do that? Oh, okay. So what you would do is, when you've reverse engineered, you've done your reverse engineering, and it all depends on what source you're using. So if you're using a database that you're going to reverse engineer, so say for instance, I'm going to create and reverse engineer from an existing database. I have a SQL Server instance on my machine, and I'm going to use Northwind. We're all pretty much familiar with Northwind, I think. And I'm going to take out a couple tables here. So I'm going to reverse engineer all but those 2 tables. Now when I create this, it's going to create my logical, it's going to create my physical, but it's going to be 2 tables shy. Now it depends on where I want to add those tables. Do I want to add those tables by hand, or do I want to add those from the database? If I want to add those from the database, I can use the compare and merge. Now I just right-clicked on the white space, and I'm going to go to compare and merge utility. And this comparing and merging, I can then, oops, sorry, I'm in the logical model. I need to be in the physical model. So in this compare and merging, I can then compare this to that database, and I can pick up those missing tables. And go ahead and compare, click next. I'm going to compare everything and click next, and it's going to show that those two tables are not in my model. Here, these tables don't exist. So then I can choose to move those into my model and click finish. And now I have those tables. I don't know what happened to the other one. Oh, it's hidden? No? Where's that other table? Oh, I only did it for the one. I didn't do it for all of them. So I only brought in that one table. But that's how you would do that. Now, if you have other sources, of course, you would reverse engineer the whole thing again and compare between two different model files and bring those in. Question, can data sources be linked to terms or only ER objects? That's a great question. Let's take a look. So over in TeamServer here, if I go to data sources, I can click on this particular data source, and looks like I can only add those two objects inside my model. Now, the cool thing about this is I can actually relate it to the entire model. So if I choose relate, I can link this to the entire model, which makes sense, right? You wouldn't have multiple sources for one specific model or model within the model, right? Because I have a prod and dev. So they're in the same DM1 file, of course. You can have multiple sources in the same DM1 file because you can have multiple physical models inside the same DM1 file. But these data sources would relate directly to the model. And then, of course, you can link the model to the term. So say, for instance, if I go here to HRDB prod, I can then link this to a specific term. And I can also see the related data sources for this object. So data sources link to models, models can be linked to a term, and the terms can be linked to glossaries. Now, can you talk about TeamServer as a data catalog? How does this compare to other data catalog products? Now, it all depends on what you mean by a data catalog. Do you mean data catalog as far as what components you have, your tables, your columns, and how those are defined and what type of data they will hold? Or do you mean data catalog as far as what content is actually in those objects? Like a SQL query would be someone's data catalog. If they do select distinct from column A and it gives them that listing, is that your data catalog? Now, I'm hoping and I'm assuming that yours is the previous and not the latter, the former, not the latter, but in that your data catalog is a showcasing of all of those objects and how those objects relate in your entire enterprise. And if that's the case, then TeamServer shows all of that. As long as you have created your models and you have all of that information, you've created your sources, your data lineage, and you've produced those, TeamServer can showcase all of that information and then allow the business to then add additional concepts or context around those objects. And this makes your data catalog even more robust than just being bland. Column A is in table 2, and it's knowing that is fine, but understanding what information is actually held in those and how that correlates to business needs and business rules is the most important thing. Next question, so how do I refresh the revenue engineered table with changes that happen to the database? Again, through compare and merge. So if someone made a change in the database, or hopefully you're making the change in the model, it's never the best case, right? Best case scenario is that no changes happen in your database until the model is changed. You update the documentation, you create the documentation, then you can move those changes into your database. Now, depending on what database you are using, we have the ability for you to what we call forward engineer. So with forward engineering, you can use compare and merge, and you can make a change in your model. Say, for instance, if I go into this table and I add another field, and I'm going to use domains. I don't have domains in this one. I didn't infer domains. Silly. So I'm just going to put in title and say, OK. So now this particular table in this physical model has title in it. So if I want to move those changes into the database, or someone made a change to the database and I want to move those into my model, I can use, again, the compare and merge utility. Now, again, this compare and merge against a live database is only compliant with specific platforms. We have a list of those platforms out on our website that you can take a look at. SQL is one of those platforms, so I'm going to connect to MySQL. And again, did before with compare and merge, you would then see the differences between the database and your model, and then you can move those changes either from the model to the database or vice versa from the database to the model. Now, we do have AWS support with forward and reverse engineering as well, have support for Redshift only. So, oops, that's not it. So you would use Redshift, and you would, to connect to Redshift for your forward and reverse engineering, you would choose your ODBC, and via ODBC through reverse engineering, and same thing with forward engineering. So can we customize fields visible in for teams and ER objects like tags or classifications? Absolutely. So through the ability, through the data dictionary, you have attachments, right? So you can create a new attachment. You can call this, since we're on the theme of governance, I'll just create a submodel or a subfolder called governance here. And for instance, if I wanted to, I can say specific tags like class, maybe calls. See, so maybe class. And then I can also specify a particular values. So maybe I'll have a high, medium. I may be way off base as far as what you mean by class, but I'm just going to give them these particular values. And now a person can then associate this attachment with various objects inside their model. So all of these objects, all of these object types here can then be attached to this attachment. Now I'm just going to do it for a particular entity, and since I'm in the physical model, as it says up here, in the physical model, I'm going to do it for employees and attach it to that. Now, I can't see in the employees table that there's an attachment. So I'm going to go and change my diagram and display options, and I'm going to choose to show the attachments and their values. So now I can see that this particular table has a class of high. And of course, if this is promoted, this data dictionary is promoted to an enterprise data dictionary, you'd be able to then, like I showed before, take this attachment and apply this as an attribute to various glossaries and terms, if you wish. My organization has multiple login domains. Can single sign-on for TeamServer be configured for this? Yes, we do allow you to use LDAP and Active Directory for login. Can you use the business rules defined in Business Architect in the same way you demonstrated from Data Architect? No. Now you can define your business rules in Business Architect. That's a great place to do that. And it's a great place to hold that. The unfortunate thing about it is that Business Architect, when it's promoted up into TeamServer, is that it's only an image, and it only shows the images and not the various small components. It doesn't break it out into smaller components like in Data Architect. So in Business Architect, when you promote it, it'll be a workspace, and that workspace is essentially just a picture, just like you would have with this main model here. It's a picture of what it looks like, and it's a great map in understanding where things are held or what applications are being used and things like that. But as far as drilling into those business rules and various objects and so forth, you can't do that with TeamServer with Business Architect. Do we have a trial version? Yes, we do. Please contact IDERA. Go to the IDERA website and you can download a free trial for Data Architect. And you can also be asked to be contacted by your sales representative to discuss a potential trial for the repository as well as TeamServer. What difference between glossary and terms? Can we manage to allow authorized business users to enter them directly? Absolutely. So in glossaries, you can turn on and off specific permissions. So here I can see that there are permissions on this, and I can give permissions to groups, and I've created an accounting author, for instance, and specific users. So if I log in as accounting, right now I'm logged in as the admin, okay? So that means that I can go into any of these and I see this edit button, okay? Now what I've done is I've actually created an accounting login. Password's no, I don't. Now, when I logged in accounting, if it's an accounting, if I have rights to this particular one, I have permissions to accounting. But if I go into something else, oops, sorry, I should have gone into glossaries instead. If I go into a different glossary, say for instance, data governance policies, I don't have the ability to edit this. I can see things because I've been chosen and added to the viewers group, but I can't edit anything. So even here, I can't edit any of these. So you can turn it on and off specific permissions. Snowflake support for forward engineering, reverse engineering. Yes, that is coming in the next rev, which is due out in September. We will have full Snowflake support for reverse engineering, forward engineering, and everything that I showed you with SQL. So you'll be able to do your comparing and merging, create your DDL, and this is going to be great for you people that are moving from a database platform, your existing database platform, to Snowflake, because you can, in our tool, since you can have multiple physical models in the same model file. So say, for instance, I have this physical model, and down here it says SQL Server 2016. Now I can take my logical model and I can generate another physical model. And this allows me to move to a different platform. Say, for instance, Amazon Redshift, if I want. Now, what we'll also have is we'll have Snowflake, probably down here around S's, but we'll also have one for Snowflake. Now, right now, I can go to Postgres, and I'm just going to call this one Postgres. Now, imagine you're doing this also with Snowflake. So you have a Snowflake database or a Postgres database. And then right here, I can right-click, and I say Generate Database. And this is going to generate my DDL for creating all of the objects inside that database. And all I did was, what, 4 clicks? And now I'm moving directly from my existing database to a new platform. It's really pretty fantastic. Or what I could do is I could right click on this and I can compare and merge, and I can compare and merge against a live database, and I'd be able to do that via ODBC to Snowflake or Postgres or any of the others. So I could actually push these changes directly from my model to that server, if of course I have jurisdiction to do so. Can we publish changes made in model from model to database? Absolutely. So you make a change in this model, and then you go to the repository, and then you can check in your diagram and check in those changes. And again, if this model, this model is not in the repository, but for those changes that I have here, any of those changes will move into the repository. And if this model has already been published to TeamServer, those changes will automatically be reflected as well. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, I appreciate your time. Thank you, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day.